If you hear about this in a list of strange historical facts, it arrives as a joke. A flood of molasses. In Boston, people drowned in syrup. It gets 3 lines and a laugh, and everyone moves on. So here is what actually happened, and why the joke is doing a lot of work to cover something up. 21 people died. About 150 were injured. An elevated railway was knocked off its supports. Buildings were pushed off their foundations. And the company responsible spent 6 years telling the public that somebody else did it. The reason this story matters is not the molasses. It's what came afterwards, and the fact that the rules you rely on every time you walk into a building came partly out of this. Start with why the tank was there at all. Molasses in 1919 was not mainly a food product. It was an industrial feedstock. You ferment it and distill it, and you get industrial alcohol. And industrial alcohol went into munitions. The war had made that extremely profitable, and the company that owned this site wanted a tank, quickly, to hold as much as possible. So in 1915, they built one, 50 feet tall, 90 feet across, capable of holding something over 2 million gallons. It stood on the waterfront in a crowded working district, directly beside houses, a fire station, a freight yard, and a public street. Now, here is the first thing that should worry you. The construction was overseen by a company treasurer, not an engineer, a finance man who, by his own later admission, had no training in reading a structural drawing. He was under pressure to have the tank ready before a shipment arrived. He did not have the plans checked by an engineer. He did not consult the city's building department in any meaningful way. And when the tank was finished, there was a standard test available that would have cost him a few days. You fill it with water. Water is heavier than molasses. If it holds water, it will hold anything you put in it. And any leak shows immediately. He filled it a few inches deep, looked at it, and declared it fit. Then he had it filled with molasses. The tank leaked from the first day it was used. It leaked from the seams, constantly, enough that local families came with buckets and pans and collected it, which everyone treated as a small perk of living on that street. Children scraped it off the outside, and the company's response to a large structure visibly leaking its contents in a residential neighborhood was this. They painted it brown, which did not stop the leaking. It stopped the leaking from being obvious. I want to be precise about that because it is the center of this story. The problem wasn't that nobody knew. The problem was that the visible evidence was treated as a presentation issue. There were also sounds. Residents described the tank groaning and rumbling when it was filled, which is a structure telling you something in the only language it has. Nothing was done. Now, the technical part, briefly, because it matters. Later analysis of the steel found it was too thin for the loads involved, and that the number of rivets along the seams was inadequate. The steel itself was of a type that becomes brittle in cold weather, and the failure happened in January. And there was one more thing. A fresh shipment of molasses had arrived a few days before, warmer than the contents already in the tank. And warm molasses ferments, and fermentation produces gas, and gas produces pressure. None of these things alone would necessarily have done it. Together, in a tank that had been leaking for 3 years, on the first mild day after a hard freeze, they were enough. It was about 12:30 on the 15th of January. Lunchtime. People were on the street. Workers were eating outside because the day was unusually warm. Witnesses described a sound like machine gun fire, which was the rivets going. And then the tank came apart. What came out was not a spill. It was a wave, by most accounts, around 25 feet high at the start, moving faster than a person can run. And this is the part people get wrong when they laugh at this story. Molasses at that scale does not behave like syrup on a plate. Moving fast, it behaves like a fluid wall. Once it slows and cools, it behaves like setting concrete. So it hit like water and then held like cement. It pushed a building off its foundations. It lifted a section of the elevated railway and bent the supports. It threw a truck into the harbor. Horses were caught in it. People were caught in it. I'm not going to describe that further because the details are in the record and they are terrible, and because the point of this video is what happened next. Rescue was almost impossible. Anyone trying to reach a person had to wade into a substance that got thicker the longer they stayed in it, and colder and heavier. Sailors from a nearby naval vessel arrived quickly and worked for hours. The last of the dead were not recovered for several days. The cleanup took months. The harbor ran brown into the summer. And people who lived there said that on hot days, for years afterwards, the whole district still smelled of it. 21 people died. Now, here is where this stops being a disaster story and becomes something else. Because the company did not say that its tank had failed. The company said that the tank had been blown up by anarchists. And you need to understand why that accusation was chosen, because it was not random. This was a working-class Italian immigrant neighborhood. It was a period of real political violence and real bombings in America. There was genuine public fear. So the claim was designed to be believable to people who already distrusted that community. The company was not just denying responsibility, it was pointing at the neighborhood its tank had just destroyed and suggesting that the people who lived there had done it to themselves. The residents sued, and what followed was one of the largest civil proceedings Massachusetts had seen. More than 100 separate claims were consolidated into a single case, which is an early example of the class action as we understand it now. The hearings ran for years, hundreds of witnesses, thousands of pages of testimony, engineers on both sides arguing about steel and stress. The company's experts maintained the bomb theory throughout. And in 1925, 6 years after the tank came apart, the court-appointed auditor issued his finding. There was no bomb. The tank was inadequate for the job it was built to do. The company had failed to have it properly designed, properly inspected, or properly tested. It was liable. Settlements were paid to the families and the injured, and by the standards of what was lost, the amounts were modest. But the finding itself did something much larger, because the case had established in public, across 6 years of evidence, a very specific failure. A structure had been put up in a residential neighborhood by a company that had never had a qualified engineer verify that it would stand. And at the time, in most of America, there was no law that required one too. That is the gap this disaster closed. In the years that followed, Massachusetts moved to require that construction plans be prepared and signed by a licensed engineer or architect, filed with the city, and inspected. Not as a courtesy, as a legal condition of being allowed to build. Other states followed. The idea that a qualified professional must put their name on a structure and carry responsibility for it became standard practice. That signature is the direct descendant of this case. So think about what that means. Every building you have ever entered was signed off by someone who was legally required to be qualified and who could be held responsible if it fell down. that is not a natural state of affairs. It had to be created. And one of the things that created it was a treasurer who skipped a water test to save a few days and then painted the evidence brown. The joke version of this story survives because molasses sounds harmless. But that tank was a structure in a neighborhood full of people, and nobody with the training to know whether it was safe ever looked at it, because at the time, nobody had to. 21 people established that they should have to.